Within the mid-90s, Pokemon was in the middle of a massive phase known as Pokemania, and was well known as a 2D handheld RPG in the gaming world at the time. However, the understanding of what was a Pokemon game was about to change with a spin-off entry called Pokemon Snap. A game that instead of having you capture, train, and battle Pokemon, instead had you observe them in their very habitats, and take the best damn photo you could. But the game wasn't even a Pokemon game to start, but grew into one, and with that came a ton of cut content as such. Whether it be an old build on the cancelled 64 disk drive, cut maps, and even cut Pokemon, today on Cut Content, we will look at the beta unused content and history of Pokemon Snap. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like button too to further support us and keep creating new videos. The story of Pokemon Snap starts back in 1995 as an entirely different game. The Nintendo 64 was being heavily hyped and promoted by Nintendo, and in the background, the add-on peripheral, the 64 disk drive, was also being developed simultaneously, with several titles as well in the works for it. One of these titles was a game called Jak and the Beanstalk, by second-party developer HAL Laboratories, best known at the time for the Kirby series. Of course, this likely being associated with the same Jak and the Beanstalk fairy tale of Jak climbing a large beanstalk to the clouds where he meets a giant. As such, the development team was appropriately called Jak and Beans, and even sported then president of HAL Laboratories, Satoru Iwata, and the legendary Shigeru Miyamoto as producers. And the idea around the game was to take photos. While it isn't known how this meshes with the fairy tale, the build they had was seen as rather unsatisfactory, as there was no clear motivation for the photography mechanic of the game. At this point raised the question of what could make a clear motivation. What would people enjoy taking pictures of? But the answer soon came in clear focus. In 1996 and 1997, the world was neck deep within Pokemania, and was what anyone could think about at the time. The enjoyment of Pokemon and each of its creatures were the clear answer to the Jak and Beans team. Despite this, character designer Masanobu Yamamoto wasn't thrilled with the decision, as it meant that all the hard work put into Jak and the Beanstalk would be thrown out. Despite that, the team went ahead with changing this fairy tale into a new and unique Pokemon game. And so by the November Space World 1997 event, Nintendo announced Pokemon Snap for the 64 disk drive, showcasing two small videos of the game. What was seen was a simple field map, with some bushes and trees, and what might be either another section of the map or a different map altogether of a yellow field location with different looking trees. Both maps showcasing a variety of Pokemon, the yellow field with Pikachu and Meowth, and their lush green field showcasing Squirtle, Bulbasaur, Snorlax, Pidgey, and a Pokemon that never appeared in the final game, Ekans. With the final game's number being at 63 Pokemon, Ekans would have pushed it to 64, which may have been the intended number for obvious reasons. Unknown why he was dropped though, to give us that awkward number of 63. All in all though, these were all the iconic Pokemon being shown off in their first iteration, and it was clear this is exactly what people would be interested to take photos of, as the trailer was expressing. In fact, when it came to taking photos, this build had a very limited stock of film, as seen on the top left, with only the ability to take 6 photos, as it would unreel to show how much film stock is left, which it looks like the stock would reel back on 0, and you'd reload it, kinda like a shooter almost. Which I guess you are shooting in some ways when you think about it. Non-lethally, of course. Actually, we even have 2 screenshots that showcase a film stock of 120 on the right here. This might be the total amount available, and that is what we are taking out of every time we reload. As well, their utility to lure Pokemon out were there from the get-go, including the Poke Flute to likely wake up that Snorlax, apples to lure Pokemon in for just the right shot, but unlike the final game's Pester Ball that would put a Pokemon in a sort of daze or give them a shove, there was a rock here instead, much like the main game's rock in the Safari Zone. Likely being in 3D, it might have looked a little brutal to be whipping what were rather lively Pokemon here with rocks. And that's the thing, the Pokemon were very lively here, to the point of where we see the Snorlax actually waking up and striking a pose even, unlike his sleepier final version. This along with a Pidgey actually being on the ground, something never seen in the final game. Meanwhile, Meowth is doing a silly walk. And on top of that, it seems the Pokemon were to be more expressive, with Pikachu and Squirtle having unique poses at that. In fact, Pikachu's early model had some differences with the brown parts of his tail being higher up. But like the final game, the pictures taken were kept in a camera check at the end of the level. Or rather a photo album, unlike the final game's more digitized appearance. Though between the final game's release and this build, they did try to go for a more black background for a while too for unknown reasons. And so as development ventured on, the game's maps continued to be built, with several pieces of concept art even being designed for them. Of course, a lot are pretty obvious to their final counterparts, but interestingly, neither of the reveal maps seem to be here. Either those were scrapped entirely, or potentially they might have been reworked into the river and / or beach levels with how grassy and lush they are, like those two levels. But what is interesting is this one piece of uncolored concept art. This is a level that resembles nothing in the final game. In fact, it appears to take place at night, with the moon in the background there. On top of that, we have a dead tree here too, and what may be towers. This may be from the cut horror related map of the game that they were developing. The composer of the game, Ikuko Mimori, had revealed via her website of 2 scrapped songs for this horror stage, called Fantastic Horror. And the theme of the horror boss. Fantastic Horror likely being the track for the level this concept art depicted, which in this case, the map itself is very fitting for a Gen 1 spin-off game, as the Pokemon Tower was very iconic for the Ghost Pokemon, and here, we got 2 of them that we apparently would be entering via spinning around on the hill to go up. The issue though is there are only 3 Ghost Pokemon in Generation 1, so likely I imagine they might have also further used other tricks to bring about the horror theme of this level, such as things like that pincer shadow we see in the tunnel level to give us a spook. Or maybe they might have even brought that whole literal ghost from the original game as a photo you could take. But the other song, theme of the horror boss, is interesting, as there are really no bosses for stages in this game. Mew counts as a boss, but doesn't have a level building up to it. In this instance, it's possible that they were at the time considering giving each level their own boss. For this level, however, the obvious candidate would be a Gengar, but alternatively, if we are going by Gen 1 themes, it's possible the Ghost Marowak would have appeared here as a final boss originally. Alas, the reason isn't officially known why this level was scrapped. Mimori simply stated that it was discarded for various circumstances. Which, if I'm a gambling man, 3 Ghost Pokemon and coming up with creative ways to spook just wasn't enough to make a whole level out of, and so it was scrapped, and potentially the Ghastly and Haunter meant for that level were reused for the tunnel, much like the pincer. Who knows, maybe that section of the tunnel is in fact a remnant of the horror level. Now concept art even exists for the whole island that you see on the title screen. The final one depicts the level pretty well, such as the beach level, volcano, tunnel, cave, river, and the valley. However, the original concept art, while looking similar, has several differences that may show some of the original ideas they had for stages here. The volcano originally was smoking, for example, which in level it does smoke, so this is actually closer to the final games. But it seems the lava pools are missing, which might point to a more in-volcano level originally. The beach's layout is also quite different, with no rails in fact, and what might be a lighthouse here. Next to it is an entire village actually, which nothing of the sort appears in the final game. Potentially a map for taking pictures of Pokemon in a town was considered? Or maybe this is that very horror level, considering the towers and even a church appears, which the church bells could be heard in the song for the level. Speaking of the cut horror music, there are 2 more themes that were cut from the final game, and that is these 2 jingles here. The purpose isn't known, but I can see it being used for how Oak grades your pictures. But I imagine that'd get annoying after a while of seeing through 60 of your photos. While in development, the aim was to release this game for 1997 to coincide with the release of the Pokemon movie Mewtwo Strikes Back, which would be perfect with Mew as its final boss. However, that was easily missed, and not something the development team had anticipated being the goal while making it. But in 1998, the game was shifted from the 64 disk drive to simply being a regular Nintendo 64 game. This was being done to several games at that point too, including the hotly anticipated Zelda 64 and Donkey Kong 64. This likely being due to the 64 disk drive's constant delays and lack of faith in it, let alone making the barrier for entry for what is a highly anticipated game for Pokemon fans rather hard. And so this change was announced to the public in January 1999 via the Dengeki Nintendo 64 magazine, and with a sudden release date of March 1999 to go with it, only 2 months after the console Switch announcement. And so Nintendo started to promote the game via kiosks at various outlets that let you play with a message that said to buy Pokemon Snap to see more. And so the game released on March 21st, 1999 in Japan, and July 26, 1999 in North America. The game, which Jack and the Beans team at HAL Laboratory had worked on for several years, was out, and even had their team's logo hard printed into the game, showcasing the game's true origins. On top of that, Nintendo started to distribute kiosks to Lawson stores in Japan, and famously, Blockbuster videos in North America, where one could take their copy of Pokemon Snap and print out stickers of the very photos they took. With Blockbuster's closure, the kiosks were eventually taken by former employees, and many made their way into the wild and became hot collector pieces in this day and age as the only means to still print your photos and a relic of the era. Some even going for as much as $12,000. In fact, some even went as far as to even make their own machine that would replicate the product of the era in mounting a ROM off the Steam Deck, or even the release of the Switch version, which subsequent releases of the game via the Virtual Console and Nintendo Switch Online changed Jynx's skin color from black to purple due to controversy, as done in other Pokemon game re-releases. But the legacy of Pokemon Snap has stayed with fans over the years, setting the stage for other Pokemon spin-offs, including the ever-popular Pokemon Stadium on Nintendo 64. Having gained a cult following, many yearned for years for a new entry to this outstanding game, and eventually it happened, with new Pokemon Snap on the Nintendo Switch. Whether it be a sequel or another popular Pokemon spin-off, these are games that I plan to cover eventually, so hit the subscribe button for I'll plan to be back with more Pokemon and other games cut content and history soon. Hit the like button and comment below on what you think that cut horror level would have been like. So everyone, thank you for watching!